from the last seminar of this Digital Futures event. We have Laura Forlano, professor in the College of Arts, Media, and Design in Northeastern University, and she has done numerous works in the intersection of design, emerging technologies, systems, and especially around the context of disability, post-human design, and feminist crip technoscience. And today's seminar is going to be a manifesto for critical crip and cyborg futures. And the floor is yours, Laura. There are many people in the physical space and also in the Zoom room.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ju Young. I'm so delighted to be here and to participate in this FemTech summer school. Certainly wish I could have been there in person earlier in the program, but I'm glad to be the last event. And I know many of you probably know my work, so some of this may be familiar, and I'm happy to talk about some of the new updates. But what I want to offer you today is something I'm calling a manifesto for critical crip and cyborg futures. Um, it's a bit of a misnomer. I will present several manifestos, but what I want to invite you to do as participants in the summer school is to think about your own manifesto. So towards the end of the talk, I'm going to present a series of questions that I hope will be very generative for you. So thinking specifically about, women, women identifying, non-binary, scholars that are perhaps, really interested in thinking about the questions of what does it mean to make a life, and also make a life within universities and also make a life politically. Um, and so that's kind of my invitation to you. Um, so so I will start off. So I go by she, her pronouns. I identify as white, middle class, highly educated, living with a disability, privileged, Italian American, human, and I think I'm human. Um, but I also write from the perspective of the disabled cyborg. And I'm not going to go into a lot, what that subjectivity means. It is present in some of my writings, but I'm currently working on a book project where I'm really trying to define that much more specifically as well. So the outline is just this overall intention to manifest new worlds within the FemTech summer school, and then to tell you a little bit about the work of my group, and then to present a series of manifestos, including the Critical Futures Lab work in progress, kind of some of the guiding principles that we're thinking about in our community, and an invitation to write your own manifesto. So my group, the Critical Futures Lab, consists of myself, actually two postdocs now, Sasha and Irem, who's not pictured there, um, um, Maria Fernanda, a doctoral student in the PhD program at CAMD, Lee, Asli, and Unju, and we're working on a number of different projects, some of them more socially scientific investigations around gender and UX, and some of them more oriented towards disability storytelling, what it means to be disabled in a university setting. And then we're doing some experimentation with various types of digital knitting, different kinds of design approaches, participatory design, and futuring. So these are all, part of the projects. And I'm not going to be presenting a lot of very new work because this summer is a big summer for us of synthesizing and writing up and papers, and so we're not quite ready to share on those projects yet. So I will present to you some familiar stuff, but I really want to try to illustrate, how in my own career, like how have these different things come into conversation with one another and been very generative for thinking. So, I just gave you a bit of a recap, but, roughly, if we think about what kinds of theories we're interested in, definitely feminist technoscience and crip technoscience are very important approaches. And then, really thinking about generative design methods. And then what kinds of domains are we intervening in? generally speaking, I still identify very much as more of a sociologist of technology. And so I'm very interested in the aesthetics and politics of computing. And then, with the addition of new people in the lab, in particular, Sasha DeConnick, my postdoctoral associate, we've definitely been moving into thinking a lot more about craft and textiles because that is her main training. And, as many of you know, a lot of the work that I've been writing about in recent years is sort of how we live, intimately with machines, specifically medical devices. And specifically, my own insulin pump and sensor system is one of the topics that I've written about a lot. So, when we think about the ways in which we encounter the future in our ethnographic field sites, here are some illustrations from places that I've studied in the past. The first is a picture of the Connecting the Future. It's a vehicle that was positioned at the University of Michigan's autonomous vehicle test bed. And we got to drive around in a car on that test bed to get an experience of, what is it that autonomous vehicles are using to kind of read their environments. The second is a picture from the Brooklyn Fashion Design Accelerator, Make the Future Here. And that was a sustainable design and digital fashion co-working space of sorts and incubator of sorts. And the last is a picture from Chicago's Urban Manufacturing Initiative, so the future today. But what I've primarily been interested in is, this kind of bringing together the criticality of the work in the social sciences, the theories and ideas, together with generative design methods and more experimental ways of working. And here are some of the books that I've edited and or written over the last 15 years or so. And some of the more recent essays and shorter pieces that are more in a public website called Public Books. And then more of the very recent experimental work in arts-related publications, such as the AI Anarchies book, which came out of the AI Anarchies Symposium in Berlin a couple of years ago, and this Onassis Foundation book, Chimeras, and the recent Leonardo special issue on disability and art, specifically Crip tech approaches. So I will just give you some highlights of some of the work, and here are a couple of the pieces on decentering and posthumanism, just so those of you who aren't as familiar with my work can get a better sense. But now I'm going to dive in directly to, what are some of the key questions that I've been trying to ask in my work over the years around kind of reimagining human-machine relations, thinking about how these boundaries around human and machine are reconfigured with each new system and each new update, and how, human agency or capabilities or power are distributed with these new configurations. What kinds of new knowledge, questions, stakeholders and partnerships are needed to navigate, to even understand some of these topics. I mean, especially as some of you know, like the topic of type 1 diabetes and sensor systems and insulin pumps, it's such a complex socio-technical system in itself that even getting a handle on it is daunting, to say the least, and looking into many different literatures and trying to talk to different types of stakeholders, and in particular, what can art and design contribute to these conversations. And lastly, what are the politics of these new configurations, and then what might we embed more just, more generous, more generative relations within these the design process, and thereby within the systems themselves. And I know these are questions that many of you are very interested in as well. So what follows, I'm going to start with one manifesto that we talk about briefly in the Cyborg book, my co-author Danya Glabau and I. So, manifestos, let's say, have been written, for like hundreds of years, let's say, There's kind of political manifestos, artistic manifestos, some of the ones you might have heard about, and I'm not going to go into detail about these, but like the very masculinist Italian futurists manifesto, which, really celebrating technology in particular. Then the Bauhaus Manifesto was one that, of course, is very important in the history of design. The Situationist Manifesto. But today I'm going to talk more about, a few of the, manifestos in quotes. Are they really manifestos, or are they sets of principles? Are they attitudes or approaches? I think by the end of the talk, you'll see that I'm more using this as an invitation to, reimagine or do some worlding. Hopefully that will serve you all well as well. So with the first manifesto is the Cyber Feminist Manifesto for the 21st Century. This was done in the early 1990s by the Australian cyber feminist art collective Venus Matrix, and it was called Cyber Feminist Manifesto for the 21st Century. And it was exhibited on a billboard in 1991. And they engaged directly with Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto. And to quote them, they were on a mission to hijack the toys from techno cowboys and remap cyber culture with a feminist bent. And through a wide range of media, including zines, computer games, and installations, VNF's Matrix challenged existing understandings around women and technology, and in particular, they, quote, questioned discourses of domination and control in the expanding cyberspace. Specifically, they emphasize anti-reason rather than rational, disorder rather than order, material rather than symbolic, and the explicitly female body rather than the mind. The next manifesto I'll mention briefly, this is from a recent publication in Catalyst by Amy Hamrai and Kelly Frisch, is the Crip Technoscience Manifesto. So the word crip, in case people are not so familiar with it, it does come from the derogatory word cripple to refer to disabled people, but it's in the same way that the word queer has been reclaimed, crip has been reclaimed as a positive marker of identity and politics by disabled people. So the first is the Crip Technoscience centers the work of disabled people as knowers and makers. Second, Crip Technoscience is committed to access as friction, including protest and non-compliance, so like not following your doctor's orders. Crip Technoscience is committed to interdependence as political technology, and Crip Technoscience is committed to disability justice. The second set of principles, these are from the disability rights organization and kind of creative arts organization Sins Invalide. These are the 10 principles of disability justice. So intersectionality, leadership of the most impacted, anti-capitalist politic, commitment to cross-movement organizing, recognizing wholeness, sustainability, commitment to cross-disability solidarity, interdependence, collective access, and collective liberation. And I'm not going to go into all of these, but I hope that you will take a look at the Sins Invalide website and learn more about their work. And then lastly, these we call kind of the new cyborg futures, or like kind of a new cyborg manifesto, because the cyborg book, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, is directly in conversation, of course, with Donna Haraway's work, very much as an inspiration, but we also try to take that work in new ways. In particular, we do try to engage much more deeply with questions around race and disability in particular, and also update even, the feminist and gender discussions to contemporary issues, specifically, talking about my own experience as a type 1 diabetic living with an insulin pump and sensor system, and then also talking about women and reproduction. And so we update the examples, in the book to, our current conversations as well. So I'll just give you, these are just like the short version, but we do talk a little bit more in depth in the book about, what we mean by each of these. I think we might read it as a kind of a short a short way of summarizing like vast amounts of femtech commitments and scholarship, including, from science and technology studies and other fields. So cyborgs transgress boundaries, cyborgs are situated, cyborgs live in the real world, cyborgs celebrate the glitch, cyborgs are infrastructural, cyborgs take work, cyborgs care for one another, cyborgs speak a new language, cyborgs are political, and cyborgs cause trouble. So I'm sure many of you can get some of these references and probably, have ideas in mind of like, oh, I imagine which citations those are related to, or why those concepts are important, or how they come up in your own work. And I must say, I think this is probably a good time to really say that, one of the things that has been so gratifying and exciting to me is seeing the way that the work in the femtech communities, especially within, I would say, HCI and design, has really grown and taken shape. It's just so impressive to see scholars who are, in their PhDs or getting their postdocs or getting their first positions with the amount of work that people are publishing and all the workshops. It's like so exciting. So I'm just every day so inspired by you all and the work that you do. And there's just no possible way, that I could ever catch up. But I just really, take to heart that some of the work that I did, when I was writing my first pieces about, this kind of topic, that it's been inspiring for others as well. So that's just such a great feeling, I must say. Okay. So now, as per my usual, style, at least in recent years, I'm going to read to you. This is some yet, unpublished kind of essay, which, does take the form of, it's not quite the same as the autoethnographic field notes that I've written in the past and published in the past. It's a little bit more experimental, and it was prepared for a book project that I'm not sure is still moving forward. So it was an experimental, multi-authored piece with a few other people that you would definitely know. But since I'm not sure if that's going to come out, I'm probably going to integrate it, into other things I'm writing at the moment. So I'm going to read to you what I call a letter from a disabled cyborg. I'm not supposed to have a future. As a disabled cyborg, living with disability and living with machines means I'm all too aware of my own demise. Something is always going wrong, sometimes even existentially wrong. We can fail alone and we can fail together. I'm not supposed to have a future. Both humans and machines are disabled. They're full of flaws and failures, gaps and glitches, seams and symptoms, errors and omissions, as well as bugs and biases, bacteria and viruses. Disability is the nature of being human, but it's also the nature of living with machines. I'm not supposed to have a future. I'm not supposed to have a future. Disabled lives are often measured in future temporalities, the ways in which preferred futures in health and medicine strive for the elimination of particular conditions, diseases, and disabilities. This is described by Alison Kafer as the curative imaginary. I'm not supposed to have a future. A world without X is a world without me, or maybe without you. The world without X defutures, according to Tony Fry. Simply put, it takes away more than it offers. Striving for a better world is not the same as worlding, bringing many worlds into existence. I'm not supposed to have a future. As a disabled cyborg, I know many things that typically go unnoticed in everyday life, but I'm rarely asked. This intimacy as method often takes the
Laura, your connection seems to be lost.
Not something that should be erased. I'm not supposed to have a future. I'm not supposed to have a future. My knowledges in politics are cyborg, not only my body. I'm not supposed to have a future. I'm left out of important decisions about my life, my health, and my care. Every software update both introduces new possibilities, but at the same time takes away other possibilities, reconfiguring agencies across human and machine. One version of the smart system rendered it more difficult to eat pizza, already a challenging task when blood sugar is concerned due to the intense combination of carbohydrates and fat. I'm not supposed to have a future. I'm used as an experimental site for the testing of emerging healthcare technology. For 4 years, I was unable to sleep through the night more than a few times a week because of the AI system requiring constant human labor in order to calibrate the sensor. I'm not supposed to have a future. My history, whether genetic, social, or environmental, my body and my behavior is treated as the source of the problem, rather than the social situations and contexts that I inhabit. For example, a fun cocktail party can quickly become a source of stress and frustration. It's difficult to meet new people, hold a beverage in one hand and a plate in the other while either administering an insulin injection or using one hand to fish an insulin pump out from underneath your clothing. I'm not supposed to have a future. Until recently, I met almost no one like myself in the last 14 years. Disabled cyborgs, like many other beings, are awfully lonely and scared without social support, community, and interdependence. I'm not supposed to have a future. If there's a right to a future, then for me, there must also be a right to insulin for all. Everyday people like me die to the lack of access to or rationing of the hormone insulin, which was invented 100 years ago and sold for $1. I'm not supposed to have a future. I'm not a problem to be solved. I'm not supposed to have a future, but my data is obsessively collected, stored, and sent to doctors, hospitals, and medical device manufacturers. It doesn't matter that the quantitative metrics do not correspond to my own self-image or my desired aesthetic representation. I'm not supposed to have a future. We don't have a community with physical, geographic boundaries. Rather, we exist in distributed networks, hashtags, and social media groups. Occasionally, we pass one another in a restaurant, in an airport, at a conference, sensing other disabled cyborgs in our midst. I'm not supposed to have a future. Instead, I have multiple futures. I'm not supposed to have a future. I'm not supposed to have a future, but the data from my insulin pump has found its way into a robotic sculpture, unmaking the punitive logics of tracking and surveillance and remaking them as infrastructures of curiosity, experimentation, and refusal. I'm not supposed to have a future, yet here I am, futuring nonetheless, telling my story and writing a letter to detail my facts and fictions. A Crip utopia is possible. So now I'm going to unpack, and I've actually never read that whole piece. I've sometimes given snippets, but only in the last 3 months. So one book that I'm engaging with here is this work, The Future is Disabled, by Leah Lakshmi Pipina Sanarsina. And just to give a few quotes from that work, she says, she writes, disabled people aren't supposed to be alive, take up space, exist, joyfully, complicatedly, thrivingly, ordinarily in the present in so much utopian, social justice-oriented science fiction. It's unquestioned that in the good utopian future, disabled people don't exist. The second quote is, a major feature of ableism is that it works to erase us from ideas of the future. And then third quote is, what would a future look like where the vast majority of people were disabled, neurodivergent, deaf, mad? What would a world radically shaped by disabled knowledge, culture, love, and connection be like? Have we ever imagined this, not just as a cautionary tale or scary story, but as a dream? And then a few other quotes from that work. I'll say just one, let's say. Making a future in non-ideal conditions in the middle of utter disaster, grieving, panicking, mourning, PTSD'd out, deeply depressed, fumbling, fucking up, and trying again is a Crip way of making a future. And then one other piece that does kind of bring together disability and futures is one by Slee, Damhoff, and Kalnin, Disabling Futures. And they articulate a crooked, a cripping, a concept of futures with reference to Crip theory. They're musing on basically attempting to consider the multiplicity of disability in a similar area to the dishuman and thinking about the human through disability. So they're asking, in what ways are we all encumbered, shaped by our entanglements, our ontologies, cosmovisions, epistemologies, our various embodiments, lived realities and conditionalities? What other agencies and intelligences exist which trouble the notions of agency, control, and human itself? And they talk about what disabled lived experience might do to notions of desirability and relations to space and time. Okay, and then, so moving on, often I do a data performance, and this is something that Louise Hickman and I wrote up for the AI Anarchies book, and this was essentially a performance of some of the data, 1 day of data from that insulin pump and sensor system. And I will do it for you today. I think we have just enough time to get to all the material. So the data performance, and I'm working actually with a communication coach and actress this summer to essentially train myself to deliver this in an even more compelling way so that I can embed it into an upcoming installation of sorts. So here's how it goes. Day 27, July 27th, 12:31 a.m., low reservoir. 5:56 a.m., calibrate now. 7:01 a.m., calibrate now. 8:06 a.m., calibrate now. 8:31 a.m., change sensor. 1:05 p.m., low reservoir. 2:27 p.m., lost sensor signal. 2:43 p.m., possible signal interference. 2:59 p.m., check connection. Ensure transmitter and sensor connection is secure. Then select OK. 5:02 p.m., sensor connected. 5:06 p.m., sensor warm-up. 7:01 p.m., calibrate now. 7:30 p.m., BG required. 7:31 p.m., alert on low. 8:11 p.m., alert on low. 8:41 p.m., alert on low. 8:46 p.m., low sensor glucose. 9:06 p.m., alert on low. 9:06 p.m., low sensor glucose. 9:31 p.m., alert on low. 9:40 p.m., BG required. 9:40 p.m., calibration not accepted. 9:56 p.m., calibrate now. 9:58 p.m., change sensor. Oh, was I frozen just now or was that before? Hopefully that was only a brief interruption. Sorry. Okay. So this in writing up, some of the recent work, in particular the robotic sculptures, I looked specific, which I'll show in a minute, but I looked into Tobin Sieber's understanding of disability aesthetics. So disability aesthetics refuses to recognize the representation of the healthy body and its definition of harmony, integrity, and beauty as the sole determination of aesthetic. Rather, disability aesthetics embraces beauty that seems by traditional standards to be broken, and yet it is not less beautiful, but more so as a result. And so here is kind of where the question I want to pose to you all, and I'll revisit this at the end, is, what is it that only you can do? And this is a wonderful question that a colleague of mine asked when we review assistant professors going up for associate professor or associate professors going up for full, in order to, I think, help people to really center their own, sort of their own intellectual and creative compass and their own values and their own like sense of themselves, and to really, you know, focus on, what is it that only you can do, right? And so I think, as you can probably see for my writing and for my project, at least in the last few years, or even, 10 years, but this was like a very slow build, let's say. I really had to kind of ignore, perhaps lots of things that I was comparing myself to, other people who are publishing books or articles, or thinking, oh, why don't I do this? Or I should have done that. But then with this project, it kind of really forced me to think, gee, this is such, it's a unique experience that not many people have insight into. So why don't I center that? Right. And so these what if questions are kind of me asking myself, what kinds of jumping off points might I have if I center that experience of type 1 diabetes and living with sensor systems? So what if I redesign myself or my life? What if I design new interfaces, fashions, or coverings? What if I use my data to create art objects? What if disabled people design their own technologies? What if I participate in and design new communities or social structures? And what if I create new infrastructures? So I'm going to show examples of a few of these things. Definitely there's a fashion example and there's a data art example. And I have to also report back that in terms of participating in and designing new communities, I've been running a group for about 15 months that meets on a monthly basis, which are all type 1 diabetics who are in academia, arts, design, scholarship, in a wide variety of disciplines. We have about over 20 members, but we're all in different cities. So it spans from Amsterdam to San Francisco at the moment. It's sort of the time zone difference. But we have, people from various stages of their careers, older folks and younger folks just starting out. So it's just been a really rich research network, but also social support network in some ways. And we're still trying to find out, what we might do with this group. So I can say that I actually took the first step to like move forward with that question as well. Okay, so the Pancreas at the Pool project, this is a bathing suit that I designed with the queer Crip fashion designer Sky Kubakub from Rebirth Garments. It was driven by my desire to, or my worry or anxiety about going to the beach with these devices. And so it was really kind of early on in 2015. I'd only been using the devices for about 2 years at the time. So it was thinking about, well, what happens in the summer, with these devices on my body? Is this going to be strange going to the beach? And so working with Sky, co-designed this bathing suit in which I was able to choose the material and the pattern and these ideas for these little pouches that strapped. You can see the little straps on the red band that's where these coverings would go. And since then, it's turned out that while this has been a very useful prototype, let's say, for thinking through questions around privacy, surveillance, invisibility, visibility. I've never actually worn this to the beach. So, because normally when I go to the beach, I just have a cover up on and it really isn't that big of a deal. And now that I've been living with these devices for 15 years, and maybe even they're becoming a little bit more familiar in, public spaces. So I perhaps am not as worried about it. And also the device that I use now is actually smaller and much better designed than the one that I used for the 4 years that I was talking about just now. So, it's still been a very interesting project, maybe from a more therapeutic perspective, and also a design and sort of arts perspective, I would say. Okay, the next creative project that, kind of came out of this work is my collaboration with the interdisciplinary artist Itziar Barrio. And this was the show at Smackmillan Gallery in Dumbo. The title of the show, Did Not Feel Low, Was Sleeping, was taken from that same data set of the 30 days of censored data that I had transcribed in July 2019. So it was just a note that I had in the data, which I shared with Itziar. Itziar and I actually met through the New Museum's New Inc. Art and Tech Incubator. We were not paired as mentee and mentor, but we decided to follow up anyway and just had really rich conversations about the cyborg and posthumanism for a number of months. And then I did a studio visit with her in December 2020. So this was like during pandemic year one. And then about 5 months later, she asked whether I would be open to, sharing some data with her and having her use it in the robotic sculptures. And so here's an example of one of those sculptures. One of the reasons that the work, and she had already made some of the sculptures, but they just hadn't been actuated with any data, was compelling to me because of the nature of the materials that she was using. I very much felt that like the cement, sort of as kind of the opposite of kind of a Silicon Valley style, iPhone glass and shiny innovation. Like the cement really spoke to me as kind of a very STS kind of material. And then also the spandex pants. So she uses her own spandex pants in this. So you can see this is like the rubber on this sculpture, but she also has other pieces with the spandex pants. So just really, I found it really, compelling. And I could sort of see in her studio, I could just see the citations that I would cite if I were to write about, those works. And then you can see that in the back, there's a circuit board with data actually printed directly on it. So this is one of those circuit boards with some of the data printed on it. And so there are about 4 of these sculptures that are part of this body of work. Only 3 of them use data to actually inform the movements. And so one of the pieces that does use the data has kind of a servo motor that kind of very slowly writhes back and forth. So it's a very subtle movement. And that, of course, has to be determined also, like, depending on the space that you're installing it in. You have to think about like whether those movements are even going to be noticeable in the gallery. And then Itziar actually did just last month work on another piece. I guess it would be the 5th in the series of pieces, but it's another piece that does use the data, and it has kind of a movement back and forth. So each of the pieces, once I see them, I then also somehow relate that back to my own experience being awake at night, like writhing in bed or breathing or just like looking at the ceiling for hours because I've been woken up. So that's just to tell you a little bit more. That piece, this collaboration is written up in the Leonardo Crip Tech Creativity, or the Crip Tech special issue, which came out last April. So you can read more about the details of the pieces. The piece that I'm working on now is an installation project. I'm not talking about it very much at the moment, but I can say that it is related to the same experience of sleep deprivation. And we're working with right now, hand knitting, but also digital knitting some swatches. And now we've, spent about a month developing that. And we're hopefully by the end of the summer or soon in the fall going to be producing with a studio in Amsterdam. And so there will be more to say about that when we have like our prototypes, and hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have more of the writing done as well. But not saying a whole lot right now. So, and then, this kind of, for a long time, I was really stuck in like an STS critique of my experience. And, maybe I still am to some extent, because I do want to make important arguments in kind of the critical computing world about like why these systems have kind of gone wrong, and sort of what are the reasons for these designs, which is clearly interplay between, you know, engineering logics, but also like legal demands and regulatory, right? There's so many business models, obviously, right? So many different factors that shape these designs. And I do want to make those critical interventions. But one of the things that working on like the bathing suit and the robotic sculptures has allowed me to do is to really kind of move into a much more generative space. And that has then allowed me to also be more performative, I would say, with the, you know, the way of delivering the work, like in the first person and sort of through reading almost like a poetic style. And I'm still learning. I was never trained in theater or performance at all, but this is just something that has taken on, just in the last, I would say, 3 years, it's like taken on a life of its own. And I've gotten more and more interested in how I can really develop that. And at the same time, started coming across other type 1D scholars and artists, partly through the group that I started, which is called T1 Design. So if you know any T1 artists or designers or scholars, just send them my way. But the first piece is one by Lindsay Butin and Cal Brook. And this is a Sic Futurity zine. And you can find that online, I believe on Lindsay's site. But some of the quotes here from the zine: we problematize the narrative of surveillance for care in diabetes management. The project envisions a future for well-being that what would well-being for all look like if sick and disabled people's perspectives were centered. This is Sic Futurity for everyone's freedom. And then Sic Futurity is an experiment in what we call radical interdependence as method. So just to bring that one to your attention, it's about, I think, 60 to 80 pages. So there's a lot more material in there. And this is a piece by Michael Lee Zarulnik called Strips and Needles. This is 1,796 glucose test strips and 1,491 insulin syringes encased in 366 lucite panels. So as far as I understand it, you know, it's basically one for every day of the year, and it was installed in the Mayo Clinic. And so the intention of the work was to bring doctors and, you know, others in the medical field into direct contact with both the amount of labor that is required to kind of follow doctors' orders and also the huge amount of plastic waste as well, and just what that experience is like. The third piece is Samthulin's Sensing Sugar. And this one is a platform that you can try out also that allows you to see and hear your blood sugar data as music and visuals. So it's more of a data visualization project. And the third piece is Generic Errors Clock with Benefits. And this is made from a hacked Omnipod insulin pump. And so far, those are the three that those are the four projects that that I know about that are in conversation with, you know, some of the projects I've been doing. And my goal ultimately will be to bring some of these together, hopefully in an exhibition. But that's still early days. Okay. So now I'm going to move to, I mean, I'm happy to kind of pivot directly to the end because I think we would probably like to have more time for questions. So I may skip through the cyborg. I have a couple slides on the cyborg book, but most people will be able to find that in their library, the full text. So maybe I'll just jump to the end, to the two last manifestos, so to speak. Well, the one that I'm designing for my lab, and then the one that I would love you to think about, and we can move into discussion. Okay, so I'm just going to skip through those. I already read this to you. So here's the Critical Futures Lab work in progress. You know, I drafted this a couple of months ago, just trying to encapsulate some of the values and norms that I think are important for a research community and things I've learned, you know, learned in my own career or from my own academic communities as well. So first, you know, we really highly value scholarship and writing that's creative and experimental. 2, great titles matter. 3, we're aiming for design that is also empirically and qualitatively rich. 4, data is made, not found, and communities are shaped, not joined. 5, when an exciting project lands on you, take it where it needs to go. 6, when it comes to impact, every person counts. 7, have fun or don't do it at all and break bread together. 8, imagination is not enough, take action. 9, don't lean in, but do claim space and find your people. 10, you already know a lot, write it down and keep searching for what's next. And that kind of moves into the one that I would like to invite you all to think about, maybe after this workshop or even in the Q&A. Write your own manifesto. So ask yourself, what is it that I can do? How do I claim space for my words? How do I claim space for my creative practice? How do I claim space for my body? Who are my people? How can I bring them together in community? What makes me laugh? When do I have the most fun? When do I feel the most creative? What makes me depressed? When do I feel most exhausted? What is my most treasured personal truth? What is my deepest professional goal? And what do I desire for others politically? So that's my invitation to you all. And I hope now we can have some discussion and Q&A. Thank you so much.